Photographers are visual storytellers. The term storytelling has become a buzzword, and not just for photography. Interior designers are storytellers, ad agencies are storytellers. Everyone seems to be a storyteller, and normally I'm not one for buzzwords, but here's the thing about this one. It's true. We are all storytellers. We've been telling stories for tens of thousands of years. It's human nature. It's how we make sense of the world all around us. But not every photo tells a story. To tell a story, you need to correctly apply a set of guidelines, just like you do when you're correctly exposing a photo and using your shutter speed and aperture, or when you create an aesthetically pleasing photo by applying compositional theory. Storytelling is no different. You have to learn it. And that's why I'm so excited about this series, because once you learn these storytelling guidelines, it will change the way you think about photography, from composition to posing and everything else in between, because every decision will revolve around the story. Can you really tell a story with just one photo? It's a question I get quite a lot, and to find the answer, you need to look into what a story really is. A story unfolds over time. Let's say it's a film. You start at the beginning and you finish at the end. And that film might use 150,000 frames to tell its story. And all this might lead us to assume that stories can only be told in this linear fashion from beginning to end. And if that's the case, where does it leave the photographer with his one frame? Well, it's pretty simple, really. The photo you take, that one frame, it isn't a story. Not in the traditional sense, anyway. One photo can't tell a layered, structured story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. But that doesn't mean that your photo can't be a really powerful storytelling tool. In photography, you're not so much telling a story as hinting at one, leaving clues that are compelling enough to draw your viewer in. Your role is to imply a narrative through deliberate composition. The viewer will do the rest. Think of them as a co-author. And that's why it can be so powerful, because unlike a movie where the viewer is just sitting back and passively consuming the story, in photography they have to actively engage with your photo. They have to lean in to close the story loop. And engagement, as you already know, is the holy grail for modern photography. Okay, so hopefully I've sold you on the why you should do this. Now let's have a look at how. How can you create a narrative? But first, a disclaimer. I tend to plan out my concepts, so this series is focused on storytelling for staged photo shoots. That in no way means that you can't tell a story with a candid photo. Of course you can. Just look at photojournalism or someone like Steve McCurry or Alex Soth. The reason I plan my photos out is basically because I don't like leaving anything to chance. Okay, let's get back into it. Step 1, creating the story. I've already discussed why you can't tell a traditional story with just that one frame, but you still need to start your planning process with a story. And I'm going to use the word story really loosely here. You don't need to pen a sequel to War and Peace or anything. You just need the basic premise. Remember, you only have to give enough context so that your viewer can close that story loop. Right, so there are 3 components you need to think through when sketching out your story: the conflict, the characters, and the location. Now, this is going to be way easier if I use an example, and I'll use a photo from an Aztec shoot we did last year, maybe 2 years ago. Okay, so in a story, the conflict is the main problem facing your characters. So here's the idea I had, and look, it's a tiny bit cheesy, but that's fine. A Mexica warrior and a princess have been chased and cornered by some hostiles. So they're backed into a corner and they're preparing to fight for their lives. So that's it. That's literally all I had. As I said, it's really not War and Peace. Okay, so the characters. There are 3 characters here. There's the Mexica warrior, the princess, and the hostiles, which I'll just consider as one character. Okay, location. Most of the time, all your location has to do is not get in the way of your story. Now, this idea wouldn't have worked if I was, say, in the middle of Times Square or something, but out in the jungle, or pretty much anywhere in the nature, it was fine for this storyline. Right, so we've looked at how to sketch out a story in step 1. Let's move on to step 2, which is picking a hero. Now, you need a principal character in your photo, just like you would in a normal story. The character you choose as the hero is going to carry your photo. They will occupy a lot of the frame because that way they're going to draw the viewer's eye. In fact, everything else in your photo is essentially going to play a supporting role after the hero. For this photo, for the example, I chose a Mexican warrior as my hero. Step 3, finding the emotional core. Now, once you've got your hero, you need to find the emotional crux or the emotional core in your story. In my example, we had a lot of possible emotions to choose from. We could have gone for scared or angry, proud or resilient. It is best, however, to choose an emotion that can be easily visually represented because some emotions aren't. Jealousy, for one, is hard to show. Then you need to work out how to make it visible in the entire body, not just in the face, because body language is really powerful. Now, I used to say things like, look serious or act angry, but I quickly realized that this just didn't work. So instead, I find role-playing is the best way to do this. It only takes a few minutes, but it puts the model in a position to empathize with the character they're playing. The result is that they move and express themselves in a manner that's just way more natural. I can then study this role-playing and pick what I like and recreate that for the photo. What I saw and what I liked in the example was this stoic pose, this kind of proud stoic pose. Now, what's great here is that using a story just solved 2 big questions. How should I pose my models and what facial expressions should they have? Step 4, adding compositional symmetry into your photo. So storytelling requires you to do more than just follow blindly compositional guidelines. It requires you to understand why they work. So when I opt for a certain composition, I'm doing it because it looks great, sure, because it's aesthetically pleasing, but I'm also doing it because it's moving my narrative or my story forward. Let me explain. The hero in our example, the Mexican warrior, he's the most important character, so it follows that he should be big in the frame. We've covered that. The princess is a secondary character, so she's slightly less important, which is why placing her behind the warrior and slightly out of focus again makes narrative sense. And that's a compositional decision I did based on the story. Another one was to establish the relationship between these 2 characters. So I asked the male model to place the protective hand on the female model, and this makes it clear that they're connected somehow, that they're in this together, they're on the same team. And they're on the same team against our 3rd character, which is a hostile. So there's a lot going on in my head when I choose a composition. What perspective suits the story, or should I shoot from above or below? In this instance, I opted for a straight-on POV, or point of view. And I like this because the camera was playing the part of the third character, of the hostile, and they would be face to face, so that worked pretty well. So, step 5, minimizing non-story elements. So you've only got a few seconds maybe to engage a viewer, so it's really important to be clear and concise with your composition. So it makes sense to minimize any visual elements that really don't further our story, that are not relevant to the story. Now, if you look at the example photo, you'll see there are no extraneous elements here. We shot this against a plain rock background, so we get some nice texture and some nice interest, but nothing that's going to distract the viewer from the story we're trying to tell. Step 6, adding in the lighting. The last step here is lighting, and lighting is a great and often quite underused method to convey emotion and mood. When it's used properly, it can really help further your narrative, give you an idea of what characters are thinking and doing. In fact, because it's so important, I'll actually be covering it in one of the upcoming videos in this series. In our example from this video though, I actually looked at my story and decided to choose 2 light setups, one for each person. The warrior has a dramatic light on him, while the princess who's behind has a slightly softer, broader light covering her. Alright, so that's it for today. Hopefully you're starting to see how having a story makes every other decision way easier, from posing, facial expressions, composition, perspective, all of those. And next week we're going to look specifically at composition and how compositional theory can, when used properly, guide your viewer's gaze through the visual story you're trying to tell. I'll see you then.